back to Watchbox Studios. This is Watches Tonight. I'm your host, Tim Massa. We've got a lot on the agenda tonight. We're talking Grand Seiko's strengths and weaknesses as a brand, Patek Philippe complications we don't often talk about, and we're discussing your wrist shots, live chat, and the toughest Rolex watches to sell new. All of that tonight on Watches Tonight. We got Matt Foster, Edward Ledden of Sweden, Butik One from Poland, Dave Openkar. We got BJ, Jim Millett, Arto Charles. Welcome, guys. Good to see you on board. Remember, check out thewatchbox.com. Over 3,000 pre-owned and vintage watches. I separate them, but I guess every vintage watch is pre-owned after all. It doesn't matter. We have all types, all ages, all brands, all price points, all functions, and all styles. You will find your match. We update several times a day, so click refresh. You may be surprised. Jumping into the box, we've got Reserve Commander Desolus 2. We've got Watchusiast from Dubai staying up late, and we've got Key Left 90 from Zurich. All right. Check me out on Instagram, guys. It's my other platform. This is the long video. Those are the short videos. I've got over 2,000 of them at this point, so you can binge watch my 1-minute watch reviews. Check out the hottest Instagram channel for pure watch knowledge, Tim_Masso on Instagram. All right, viewer wrist shots number 1. I asked you answer. Here comes Ari F. and his Patek Philippe annual calendar flyback chronograph. Starting our evening's adventure with platinum and a blue dial. I love the look. By the way, how much do you adore those evacuated lug profiles? We have Andres A. of Pennsylvania, a local boy, keeping 2 time zones and the calendar with his Watchbox bought Sky Dweller, which he got from Hans Singer. Congratulations and thank you, Hans, for doing a good job on that. Thank you, Andres, for trusting our company. Jeffrey C. showcases the progression of his collection from Seiko to Vacheron Constantin. There is a place in the collection for each of those. And Mark K. of San Diego cruises in his Bentley with his Breguet Type 21 flyback chronograph. Loreno F. shares his latest Rolex edition with the help of Watchbox Switzerland. Once again, thank you for trusting our folks and welcome aboard. Send your wrist chats to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your wrist on my list. Okay, who's in the box now? Turkischer Meister joining from Turkey, Brick Lane, Whole Milk asking, what is Tim's t-shirt? Van Halen 1984 World Tour, the year I was born. And if you're wondering, my favorite off that album was Panama. What else is going on here? We got Simon T in the box, a Monk 93 from Lincoln, Nebraska. Tariq is joining in from Long Island. We've got B&S Monkey See production from Chicago. We got Muhammad Ali saying we're off to a great start. And we've got Renside and Karate Chop. All right, Mark S. of Brooklyn from my old neck of the woods out on Long Island. Okay, Grand Seiko, what works and what doesn't. Although nowhere near the production volume of Switzerland's luxury 3 of Rolex, Omega, and Breitling, Grand Seiko feels like a natural rival to all of them in terms of product class and product pricing. Other collectors agree, and there's no shortage of Grand Seiko support on this show and in this live chat box. So we're going to be fans, but we're going to be fair, and we're going to break down what's working, what's not working, the strengths and weaknesses of a very interesting brand. In order to close the gap in perception, I think Grand Seiko needs to consider a few points of constructive criticism, but first let's talk about what we love. Gorgeous dials. Grand Seiko dials rival Rolex at its best. This one recalls the clouds over the sky over Hsinchu. It is a 44GS 55th anniversary piece, a lovely watch that shows not only are Grand Seiko dials meticulously crafted, but they are also wonderfully rich in local character, something that is absolutely absent in Rolex dials, which seem as though they could have been made in clinical fashion anywhere in the world. Grand Seiko dials are geolocated to Japan, and they play it up. Color, texture, hands, dial furniture, those indices and hands are meticulously cut, polished, and satinated on diamond-tipped milling tools who make these parts all day long, and those steel hands are always fired. For the Lancet-style seconds, you're getting all of that. White Birch is an example of all of this. Color, texture, hands, dial furniture coming together. A dial that looks like nothing else from any other brand. The Night Birch, in my opinion, although a little difficult to see on screen, is even better in person. And although technically not part of Grand Seiko, they share a family. Credor's porcelain dial always brings down the house with a distinctly Japanese response to Swiss Grand Faux enamel. We also have advanced movements from Grand Seiko. Spring drive, quartz, and mechanical. Right here you can see the latest caliber 9RA2. This is spring drive, 2 barrels, now 5 days of power reserve, accurate to 10 seconds a month. No batteries, no capacitors, no stepper motors. All the drive, all the energy is spring derived. It does have a quartz oscillator, and as you could see, it is a combination of mech and tech, as we've got the quartz and we've got the springs and the gears, and the hands are entirely mechanically driven. There's a power reserve indicator on the movement, but not on the dial side of the watch. Learning from their previous generation of 9Rs, the people generally don't like the power reserve off-center on the dial side. So there is a capacity to evolve, and this is going to be important as Grand Seiko moves forward, because changes will have to be made as they become an increasingly global brand. Let's talk about the caliber 9SA5. 80 hours of power reserve now. This is the high beat movement. The previous high beat was a 55-hour power reserve. This is now an 80-hour power reserve. You get sports watch features like a full balance bridge, a free sprung balance, but also high refinements like an overcoil hairspring and a proprietary double impulse escapement that reduces friction, extends power reserve, and improves precision. You're talking precision of -3 + 5 seconds a day. Remember, COSC is going to be -4 + 6 seconds a day. You're also getting that wonderful El Primero style high beat rate, so 10 beats per second for a nice smooth sweep of the hand. We also have 9F. 9F gets overlooked. It's been around since 1993, but in terms of quartz tech, there isn't a whole lot that's better. The most highly tuned versions of the 9F are capable of keeping time to within 5 seconds a year. They have trimmer devices built in, and they're modular in their construction, so parts can be replaced over the years. These are lifetime quartz movements. They're very accurate. They're also adjustable with the trimmer system. The watchmaker can adjust for the natural drift in a quartz crystal over decades, and they're thermocompensated, which means they're not going to respond to temperature changes the way a standard quartz movement will. And of course, Crador movements are in a different league altogether. This one is in a Crador H2, but keep in mind that micro artist studio movements also feature in the Grand Seiko 8-day spring drive, so you can get the same level of finish and exclusivity. Remember, they make about 25 watches a year out of micro artist. You can get that kind of Philippe Dufour level finish on a spring drive movement from the Micro Artist Studio in a Grand Seiko watch. There's also superb case finish, and by superb I mean it's both gorgeous and it's largely handcrafted. These are hand-finished watches at very fair prices. This SBGY 009 limited edition showcases the 44 GS case with Zaratsu polish. Now, it's not quite the samurai sword polishing technique some fanboys make it out to be. It is a European-derived process on a Zalitz machine that was originally made in Europe. Now, Zaratsu is just the Japanese term for Zalitz, but the foremost practitioners of this art of mirror polishing, and I do mean optically flawless black polish, they are now the folks at Seiko and Grand Seiko in Japan. So this is an art that's been nationalized and localized, and if you want a watch that's under $10,000 and entirely hand-finished of case and of dial, you want a Grand Seiko. Plus, with that gorgeous combination of silver, gold, and blue dial and the black polished 44 GS case, this is just objectively a fantastic looking limited edition of 1,500 pieces. You will not find Swiss watches in this price range that have so much handcrafted content. And then there's exclusivity. At most, Grand Seiko is going to build perhaps 5% as many watches per year as Rolex. The upper limit, in theory, could be about 50,000, but I think they're more like 35 to 40,000 right now, so they haven't even quite gotten there. So you're going to see fewer of them out and about. Now, let me know in the chat box what you think works at Grand Seiko and what doesn't work. Let me take a quick look. We've got Joe Pinto from Louisville. We've got John Goodman from Big Sky Country. We've got Aaron Murphy from Missouri. We got Chris Fernandez, Thomas Burnett. We've got a Monk 93 from Lincoln. I think I called him out earlier. We've got Dave Opencar, Guillaume A, saying the fact that a lot of their watches have no lumen, the quality of their bracelets is a deal breaker. Well, Guillaume, we're going to talk about Grand Seiko bracelets, and the news isn't all good. Right here we have Thomas Burnett saying, my favorite Grand Seiko has been the SBGY 007, the Amawatari dial. The Spruce Moose, Tim, hi, I was impressed by the Watchbox Edition Moser Pioneer this week. Does it come complete with the titanium 50 fathoms for space in your imagination? imagination, or does it compete with the titanium 50? Just to be clear, I want to make sure I don't get anyone angry on the other end of the company. It is the Govberg edition, although Watchbox and Govberg are kind of like this. Does it compete with the titanium 50? Not for my heart. No, I like the watch quite a bit, but I think that the 50 Fathoms movement finish and capability are on a higher level than the HMC 200 and the Moser. I think the Moser is more wearable and more adjustable on the wrist. And I would also say that the grand total of advantages between the high horology elements of the 50 and its superior lume and the better fit and adjustability of the Moser. I do like them both. There is space for both in a collection as they have very different character. I think if you want a historically rooted dive watch that's one of the all-time greats, and you want something that can go toe-to-toe with a Royal Oak offshore diver for finish and patrimony and pedigree, I think you go with the 50 Fathoms. And I think if you want something that wears a little bit more compact, fits underneath the cuff, is a bit more versatile and not like a weekend-only watch the way the 50 Fathoms would be for me, then you go with the Moser. And again, the Moser has the Brogioli micro adjust in the clasp, which makes it a lot easier to fine-tune on the fly. What else is going on right here? We have Karate Chap. Tim, what do you think of the quartz? Who wins the quartz battle, Grand Seiko or Citizen? Well, if we include all Citizens, such as Campanola and Chronomaster, it's more of a fight. But I think right now Grand Seiko just offers more of interest to horology enthusiasts, especially people who are interested in mechanical watchmaking. But don't forget, Citizen also has Atelier de Monaco. They have Alpina, they have Frédéric Constant, they have La Joux-Perret, Angelus, and Arnold & Son. So Citizen is a universe of brands, just like Seiko and Seiko Epson are. Mark S. asking, Tim, what makes the Frédéric Piguet 1285 tougher than the 1185 aside from a higher beat rate? Well, most applications, well, first, it's a lot thicker. It's a lot thicker. Anytime a movement is thicker, that is going to make it more durable. I would also say that because most of the 1285s I see seem to be modified for use in Omegas, they have a free-sprung architecture that makes them a little bit more shock tolerant. So those factors. It's much thicker, and in general, it's shipped as a free-sprung movement. Okay, now, Grand Seiko, what doesn't work? First, too many limited editions. Type in Grand Seiko Special Edition or Limited Edition on Google image search, and it's just a deluge dating back most of a decade. I've counted at least half a dozen non-Japanese domestic market limited editions this year alone, and that's too many. It gets to the point that it feels like there are more special and limited editions than there are regular offerings in the Grand Seiko catalog. Look at Rolex. It makes 1 million watches a year, but it makes many versions of the same thing rather than having 20 different submariners. It offers a handful of different submariners, and it makes its case with consistency. Titanium bracelet construction and steel bracelet feel. Really, the titanium bracelets at Grand Seiko are the worst because they're assembled with pin sleeves for removable links. They also feel the chintziest. But even the steel bracelets don't feel up to the standard of Omega and Rolex, and I'm not sure they're even clearly better than Breitling or Tag Heuer. All of which is to say you get a great watch from Grand Seiko, but the bracelets still leave me feeling unfulfilled. I feel like you could add $1,000 to the price of most bracelet-clad Grand Seiko watches to give them a Rolex quality bracelet, and people would pay the price and they'd be grateful for the opportunity to do so if they were getting that Rolex level bracelet quality. The famed SBJ 211 Snowflake is a great example of a fantastic watch with a bracelet and clasp that lets it down. That watch is in titanium, and the titanium Grand Seiko bracelets and clasps just feel cheap. I would also say that this also applies to the company's diving clasps, especially on watches like the SBGA 229 and SBGA 231, which is the titanium diver, the spring drive diver. You look at this, and this is all thin gauge stamped. It's nicely made with a really long adjustable deployment system for use over a dive suit, and you can adjust it when it's on the wrist, but this feels like the quality you'd expect on a Seiko, not a Grand Seiko. Okay, finally, we've got the issue of huge watches that are kind of out of step with the times. That is the 8-day spring drive, which would be otherworldly in its finish and tech if it weren't for the fact that it's 43 millimeters, and I think the era of 43 millimeter dress watches is at least a decade behind us now. That's sort of a relic of the 2000s. There's also a problem with some of the complications. Not all Grand Seiko watches are huge, but some of the most technically interesting examples really are. A chrono GMT combo that's appealing, but this SBGC 223, if we got a picture of it, this watch is 46.4 millimeters, and who can wear that? It's even broader when you add the end link to end link distance across the wrist. It feels like it's a 48. It's like wearing an IWC Big Pilot's watch, and this SBGC 205 chrono GMT, it's not as big as what you just saw, but it's still huge at almost 44 millimeters. And again, on the bracelet, that size plays up. This is something that Grand Seiko's got to get around, because a lot of Rolex complications like the GMT Master, the Daytona, even the Explorer 2 at 42 millimeters, they don't wear anything like a lot of these Grand Seiko complications. And I'd even go so far as to say that the Yacht Master 2, which is a big boy, wears smaller than this. So Grand Seiko, please, smaller watches, both on the dress side and the complicated sports side. Okay, viewer wrist shots. Let's take a look at Derek D, who sports his Cosmic Green Moser Pioneer Center Second at the Grove in London. We got Philip L and his Pounder IPA M1226 approaching Corona del Mar, California at sunset. Patrick W enjoys the sun in Fort Lauderdale with his Omega Seamaster Aquaterra Small Second. I love that variant. Dylan L, a longtime supporter of the show, and his Tudor Pelagos Beat the Heat poolside. And Christophe L and his Zin U50S sail the Mediterranean on a sunny day and in fair seas. Guys, send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag at thewatchbox.com to see your analog on my digital. All right, what's going on here? We've got Thalai saying, Tim, some quartz Grand Seikos sell for under $3,000. They have the same finish as the $10,000 and above Grand Seikos. Do you think people focus on the wrong end of the lineup? Possibly. The problem is a lot of those $3,000, $4,000 Grand Seikos now overlap with really expensive Seikos, as you can buy Seikos that are $2,000, $3,000, and $4,000. So for me, that's the challenge when I'm looking at those lower end Grand Seikos. It's the uncertainty of whether I should just buy a Seiko and be done with it, or pay for an entry-level Grand Seiko. A 9F caliber is fantastic, and the Grand Seiko will be better finished, but you'll have more options as there are simply more high-end Seikos than there are low-end Grand Seikos. What else is going right here? Monkey C saying, still trying to pull the trigger on a Grand Seiko. Can't do the titanium for Grand Seiko. Love the Shunbun Cherry Blossoms, but not the titanium. Davey, 85, saying, I have to say, I always thought these clasps looked so cheap for such an expensive watch. We got Kevin Hawthorne, good evening from Lakeland, Florida. Renside saying, what lets down the Snowflake is the power reserve indicator. I think it messes with the overall look. That's why I hope it gets the new 9RA2, because it has the power reserve indicator on the back. Right here we've got Lac Valan saying, best regards from Switzerland. Love your show. Thank you for staying up late in continental Europe with me. We got Pete's Timepiece Safari also staying up late in the Balkans in Croatia. And then Watch Nicholas saying, too big on that. Still pretty watches though. And what else? Turkish Meister saying, for those reasons, the Elegance collection, especially SBGW 283, is really charming. Good points. We got a question from Thalai saying, Tim, do you think Grand Seiko should pursue complications beside GMT, like a calendar? I would love to see a spring drive perpetual calendar. That would be awesome. With a mechanical perpetual calendar on top of the spring drive. Right now, all we get is date displays. But Grand Seiko, please make this happen, because there's definitely room in the catalog. All right, jumping back into our regularly scheduled program, the most expensive Rolex watches are often the most difficult Rolex watches to sell new. And we're talking about the most difficult Rolex watches to sell. Again, new. We're going to focus on standard models, not gem set or off-catalog pieces that you have to special order. Those are in a different category. They're in a class by themselves. I'm talking about things you might actually see in the case at your Rolex dealer. Okay, many of these, I should also say, are great pre-owned buys because they don't have an aftermarket markup. And in one case, you're going to see that pre-owned is actually cheaper than new. So let's start with a beautiful watch objectively, but not a sales leader, the Cellini Moon Phase. The 5535, when this came out in 2017, there was briefly a frenzy around this model, and there was a waiting list for a Rolex dress watch. And I think we all believed this was the moment that Cellini was going to catch fire and become as in demand as the oyster-cased sports watches. And after about a year, that wait list was gone. The watch was infinitely available in every major market. You can easily walk into a large Rolex dealer and find one. And I'm sorry, because this is a fantastic piece. Get over the idea that every Rolex has to be a steel sports watch and a bracelet, and you can see the beauty here. 39 millimeters, a gorgeous combination of ever rose red gold with a coined bezel, a meteorite moon, and the actual base, the little blue cosmos on which the moon sits, that is enamel. You don't see too much enamel on Rolex. The dial is nicely sectored, and the hands, which are alpha style and fluted down the center, are just gorgeous. This is a worthy piece. It sells for $26,750 new, and despite a surprisingly robust secondary market where it sells used for even a little bit more than its new retail, somehow you still find these things available new, and if you want to order one, they can be delivered promptly at Rolex dealers. This is a bit of a confusing case. The watch is not in demand, but the aftermarket is fairly strong. Maybe the mark of a weak Rolex aftermarket these days isn't that the watch sells for its retail price or slightly above, but that it doesn't sell for multiples of resale, of its retail. Maybe that's the mark of a weak secondary for Rolex these days. The fact that this watch doesn't cost $90,000 used. Let's talk about the Yachtmaster 2. Now this is the 116689. It came out in 2007 with the initial batch of Yachtmaster 2s. This is the one that's all white gold with a platinum bezel, and it was shockingly expensive then. This is the first year that it's not available, as it's been discontinued for 2022. Make no mistake, some of them are still kicking around at dealers. It's sold so slowly that it is the only version of the Yachtmaster 2 that has been discontinued. And for many years, up until 2013, some people with the means would grudgingly pay the price because this was the only way to get the most complicated Rolex ever in a white metal. But in 2013, the steel model arrived for about 1/3 the price, and the demand for the white gold platinum Yachtmaster 2 evaporated. Now, it had two dial redesigns, one in 2013 when the hands became blued, and one in 2017 when it basically gained a dial like you see there. So with Mercedes-style hands and a triangular index. That 2017 to 2021 Yachtmaster 2 in white gold may prove to be one of the rarest modern-era Rolex watches. So if you're into the collecting thing, if you're into the let's guess at what 2040 is going to want most thing, that might not be a bad choice, especially since, given its retail price of almost $50,000 as recently as last year, it's got a really weak aftermarket that doesn't even break even. As you can see, many of these are selling for under $40,000. Never mind $50. You can find these things for $34, $35, $36, and with full box and papers. Now, as I mentioned, there are 3 different dial variants, and I doubt you can get this, which is the last and rarest, for under $40,000, but still, even at 40, even at 42, that's a hell of a deal. This 44mm monster is surprisingly wearable in spite of its stated size. It wears nothing like a 44mm deep sea, and it is the most complex Rolex ever made, with a programmable countdown chronograph that has a mechanical memory, vertical clutch, column wheel, and the ability to fly back or fly forward to the nearest minute in pursuit of regatta timing. Plus, since it is a programmable 10-minute countdown, you will find all sorts of uses for this tailorable chronograph that do not involve racing boats. I like it, and I think it's a cool piece that wears well as long as your wrist is 15 centimeters circumference or bigger. I can wear it, and I generally don't say that of 44s. Now, the date 128238, yellow gold, 36 millimeters, especially this variant with a yellow gold sunburst dial. This is just a little bit frumpy and undersized for modern tastes. It costs just under $34,000, and these days, a lot of folks who want to get a date want to get the date 840, which frankly, even a woman can wear, which leaves questions about who really wants the 36mm watch, especially when the pricing is so high. It's a cool piece, but this is the closest to the original 1955 date 8 in size and appearance, and a lot of folks want to go with a strap. A lot of folks want to go with some sort of 40mm watch where you get other options, more wrist presence, better resale value. I'm not saying that this isn't a watch that sells well. It sells okay, but it's a watch that's going to sit for a while until the right kind of buyer comes along. And that's not what you expect of Rolex in 2022. You expect these things to be flying off the shelves with no time spent in the box. This is one of those watches that will spend some time in the box. Okay, the Sea Dweller 43 126603. When this arrived in 2019, we were all asking, who is this for? There is a taste for two-tone watches in East Asian markets, but not a taste for huge watches. There is a taste for larger watches in Western markets, but not for two-tone. No one could figure out who this watch was for. We all sort of guessed in the end that this was Rolex sort of designing a watch for itself, that people with enough authority to create and bring a model to market decided this was what they loved most and wanted to see. For a model that was then only about a year or two old, I mean, the Sea Dweller 43 came out in 2017. We had a standard black variant with a red Sea Dweller script that seemed cool and nostalgic, if not the Rolex dive watch to own. This one was big, garish, and weird. And frankly, I think this is just someone inside of Rolex saying, this is just what I like, and it's coming to market whether you want it or not. Also, there were some discounting issues here where some features were taken out to hit the price point with the addition of the gold. The Sea Dweller 43 had a flip-out extension and a glide lock. This one only had the glide lock, and I missed the extra feature and adjustability. This is a two-tone watch that is overpowering in size, and a lot of folks are going to look at Rolex divers, and they're either going to want to get something that's core, like the Submariner, or if they want to go big and boisterous, they're going to go all the way with the Deep Sea, preferably the James Cameron Deep Sea, which gives them bragging rights. And if they're gonna go for the Sea Dweller 43, most go for the more classical SD43 red Sea Dweller in steel. So this is a real niche piece, and again, it will sit for a while as a new or pre-owned piece. It costs $17,000 new, and that's right around what it costs used. So this isn't a watch that has a waiting market that sits with bated breath awaiting the example that rises to the front at chrono 24 in the middle of the night on a weekend. This is the kind of watch that sits for a while, and it's one of the most difficult new Rolex watches to sell. Okay, let's see what's going on in the box. This chat box moves fast. Phil Dupuis saying, interesting to see a discussion of Seiko and Rolex. There is quite a brand tribalism between the fans of these brands who think the other is overrated. Well, I'm always doing my best to be inclusive on this show. I never want to exclude anything. Last week we talked about beater grade watches, including Swatch watches and G-Shock. So we will do the Dibitune, we will do the Grubel Forsey, we'll do the Ferdinand Berthoud, but we will also do the watches that are powered by batteries and cost dozens, not tens of thousands of dollars. Right here we have James Carrion saying, I love the Yachtmaster 2. It wears like a 42, and I happen to agree with that. And we have Davey85 saying, I'd personally go Sea Dweller 43 stainless steel over sub all day. And Chaz from the Berg saying that was for Wolfgang. Wolfgang, a longtime friend in the box somewhere here. We got Bill K joining late. And we've got Gregory W saying 36mm day-date wears so much better than the 40. I gotta agree with you, and I'd probably pick a 36 vignette dial in white gold if I were ordering from the current catalog. Sean Hansen, pool and cigar. Wolfgang is happy. Wolfgang is in the box saying hi to Thomas and saying he thought it's Grand Seiko's show today, and you're not entirely wrong. Carlos Beato saying Yachtmaster is a beauty, just not my cup of tea. And Mark S. asking, Tim, what corners did Vacheron cut on the Generation 3 overseas bracelet versus Generation 2? Two things I don't like about the Gen 3 bracelet. One, it doesn't feel as solid in the hand as the Gen 2. Two, and maybe this has to do with the quick release system that Vacheron introduced, but when you've got a Generation 2, the bracelet pulls straight down out of the lugs. When you've got the Generation 3, it's rigid. It fights, it flares, you can't pull it straight down. The only Gen 3 overseas that will allow you to pull the bracelet straight down is going to be an ultra thin, either the Perpetual Calendar or the super rare 2000V. And we've got Thomas Burnett saying there's definitely a siding between these two brands, Rolex and Grand Seiko. Eric Nielsen, my 2 cents on Grand Seiko bracelets. If you wear your watch loose on the wrist, you'll be happy with Grand Seiko. If you want a close fit, you need something more like the 3-position Easy Link from Rolex. Really, I recommend that if you get a Grand Seiko watch on a bracelet, especially if it's titanium, just put it on a strap. Just skip the bracelet, put it in the box for resale value later, and go straight to a strap. Preferably a cheap aftermarket silicone strap that's going to look good and feel great. All right, jumping back to our regularly scheduled program with viewer wrist shots number 3. Manny D of Pembroke Pines, Florida, rolls in his Tesla with the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter. Looking good. Doug B captures his Zinn at sunset at the U.S. Naval Academy, Annapolis, Maryland, USA. Adam C gazes across the bucolic beauty of England with his Seiko prospects. Looking good, Adam. Welcome back to the show and the wrist shots. Lance V proves that wearing a Grand Seiko can be as easy as a walk in the park, which he's doing. And James captures a classical wrist shot with his Zinn 556 Aquamarine. That is a lovely look for a Zinn. Okay, Patek Philippe watches that aren't named after this guy. We all know who he is, and he's not on today's show, nor is his namesake. Or I guess he's the namesake of the 5711. We're not going to talk about the 5711 because I can't remember the last time Patek offered this many cool complications all at once, including the 2022 debuts. Patek's current collection might be the most interesting in the entire watch business. I do shows with Mike Manges about Rolex and shows with Brian Govberg about Patek Philippe, but while I respect Rolex and I want to represent that collector base, I adore Patek Philippe and I want to be that collector. I want to be a member of that club, just not the sports watches. So for 2022, we have a cool piece, the 5326G. It's 41 millimeters by a still thin 11 millimeters in white gold, and it's got dual time, it's got a vignette dial, it's got an annual calendar. This is the best of all possible worlds for a watch that you wear full time. So you've got a well-loomed charcoal gray gradient dial, a Patek first, with a lovely pebbly texture, and what they call ecru or cream or off-white loom. We're not going to call it Fotina, not on a Patek Philippe, but I think you get the idea. Look at those syringe hands, and note the hands are satinated, not polished. Attention to detail. It's very practical, and yet there are some whimsical elements, such as the hobnail case design, which is gorgeous as it is unnecessary. An attractive micro rotor caliber instead of the entry-level center rotor 26330 that we see on other models, or God help us, the 324. This is properly sized and properly thin for this case. Shockingly priced at $76,880. It's a lot of money objectively, but it's not a lot of money when you consider that even the cheapest steel 5711s are selling for twice that. This offers a whole lot more value with loom, a second time zone, and an annual calendar. Sign me up. Well, maybe hold that thought, because the Patek that I really want is the 5236P. We're switching some numbers around. This is the 5236. This came out last year. 41.3 millimeters in platinum. We've got that lovely 3448 style case, a satin dial with a vertical grain, a vignette fade. Blue, I love it. Easier to read than the 5235, so I love this one more than that one. And it's got an inline calendar. They call it an American calendar with the day, the date, and the month. On the reverse side, again, we've got a lovely micro rotor movement with a lovely finger train. So you've got the wheels of the train leading down to the escape wheel in a Geneva finger style reminiscent of vintage pocket watches. Lovely. This has a movement to match and a $136,020 price that if I start planning now, maybe I can afford by next year. Maybe this will be like the decision of the watch world. I'll have 1 year to my Grail watch thing and I'll update you along the way. Now, I guess between now and like my birthday next year, I'll work my way through all my Grails and finally make a decision on which one I choose for the big day. It's not like 39 is a milestone birthday, but heck, anything's a milestone with a watch like this, right? Okay, so now, 2021 59051A. This is what it should have been from its debut back in 2015 when it bowed as a platinum dress watch on a strap. This is a steel sports watch on a bracelet. More interesting than a 571114, and by the way, look what people are paying for those. This 5905 is way cheaper at $61,510. The green dial will stand the test of time, a lovely forest green metallic that, by the way, has been sectored using polished chapter rings and white gold applique indices. Note the 60-minute register for the chronograph, which, by the way, is also a flyback. It's an annual calendar. The dial is fully loomed, and though you can't see here, the case has lovely scalloped lugs that add an element to grace. the flanks of this 42mm sports timepiece. As Patek has scaled back its 5711s, it has replaced that lost steel production with interesting steel versions of dress watches, and I'm here for it. We need more like this, more like the 6007A, more like the 5212A. Patek in steel, complications, and somewhere between the dress and the sports watch segment, that's the sweet spot for me. I was never a Nautilus guy, I was never an Aquanaut guy, but I am all about this. Okay, 2019 5520p, 42.2mm platinum, a dual time and a 24-hour alarm. You can see those features on a pilot-style Calatrava. This is the most versatile watch Patek makes. Now, the 5990 might dispute that status, but there's just a lot here. Between the date, the 2 time zones, and a calendar that you can set to the 15-minute increment over a 24-hour period with an on-off toggle, I simply love it. This is a watch that's practically a minute repeater. It's a minute repeater disguised as an alarm. You have a monstrous movement worthy of repetition minute on both sides. One side you have black polished gongs and strikers. On the other side you have a calendar that only your watchmaker will ever see, but every part intricately hand finished and assembled with love in Geneva. We've got lume for real world practicality. This one you can see at night, as you should any travel watch, and it is the ultimate travel watch. There is no doubt of that. Does it look a little bit like a potato with eyes? Maybe a warthog? Maybe a naval mine? Yes, it looks like all of those things, but I can forgive it those flaws for the sheer amount of richness and utility it provides, each in equal measure. At $272,000, like all expensive alarm watches, it is destined to languish unloved. Really expensive alarm watches from Harry Winston, from Breguet, from Patek Philippe historically have always struggled because people think of the alarm as an entry-level complication, something you might find in a Seiko or an Omega from the 1970s. And while that's true, high-end alarms can be a beautiful thing, and this is a great example. This is a huge prospect for future collectors who want to buy now what people are going to want down the line. All right, the 2016 5160 500G. Craft arts here combined with an officer's style case, a very wearable 38mm in white gold, a retrograde date, and of course an aperture style perpetual calendar. Breguet Arabic numerals blackened in white gold with hands to match. The dial is a lovely engraved guilloche. The entire case lavishly hand engraved with a burin. No engines used here. Every facet of this watch, from the case flank to the case back, which is hinged, have been individually engraved by an artisan, so no two will be exactly alike. Even the crown has been hand engraved. It gets better. Lug screws, the screws that hold the bars to the straps, those have been engraved with banknote scrolling. Even the buckle features a signature style gun engraving that looks great in any era, in any market, on any wrist. Again, wearable and understated. At $195,160, it is not cheap, but compare that to the aftermarket price of a used FP Journe annual calendar, which is fairly mass-produced and has no craft art enhancement, and it actually seems like the Patek is a bit of a bargain. Guys, let's check viewer wrist shots. I asked, you answered. We're starting with Tobias L. from Phuket. With his Ulysse Nardin Skeleton X, love to see a UN in our wrist shots. John F. takes a knockout shot of his Swatch Dateline chronograph poolside in Nevis. What a shot. That might be the pure photography winner of the night. Matt C. and his daughter in Brisbane, Australia appreciate his Panerai Luminor PAM 312. Jens F. and his Zin U1D work on the tan on Portugal's Algarve coast, and Luca L. of Germany reports from work with his Rolex Milgauss Z Blue, and he takes us home. Thanks to Sean on the switcher tonight, and thanks to all of you who joined in. This episode was a blast. Let me know in the comments below, what should I do next week? I want to vary up the themes and the brands and the focus, and always keep it fresh. From my house to yours, time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.